What is going on, everyone, and welcome to the MichiganAmbushoutdoors.com YouTube page. If this is your first time visiting this YouTube page, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your guys' support greatly helps us out. But in this video, we're going to be talking about this Bohning Fletching Jig, and I'm going to share some tips and tricks on how to get proper and consistent vane placement, and then also answer some of the most commonly asked questions that I get since posting my detailed product review on this fletching jig. Now, the first thing that I want to say is this is a very inexpensive jig, so it's not going to come without some of the cons. But if you're like me and you're someone who was just getting into fletching arrows, you weren't sure if it was going to be something that you wanted to do long term, I think that this is a very solid investment and a really good choice as far as a fletching jig. Now, if you're looking for something that is going to give you a ton of flexibility, then what I would probably recommend is that you check into a Bitzenberger, or there's also another Bohning fletching jig. It's called the multi-fletcher. You can check out that jig, and again, that's going to give you a little more versatility as far as the different types of setups that you can run while fletching arrows. Now, keep in mind, the Bitzenberger and the other Bohning jig are going to run you about $100, so it's really more of a higher end fletching jig. Whereas, like I said, this thing is going to run you about $35–40. Very inexpensive to start fletching arrows. So with that being said, let's kind of talk about some of the tips and tricks that I have. So the first complaint that I would say that I have about this jig is having the ability to play around with vane placement. Now, if you're like me and you have facial hair, what you really should be doing is trying to move those fletchings a little further away from that knock to make sure that when you go to full draw and you go to anchor, that you're not getting any facial contact on your fletchings. And the only way that I was able to do that was to add this slight modification. And all this modification is doing is sliding this base forward versus where it would typically go when it came out of the box. Now, in my experience, without this modification, the fletchings were too far back towards that knock, and like I said, I was getting a lot of facial contact, so that slight mod just allowed me to move those forward. And I have arrows that I just recently fletched, and you can see how much farther that is away from the knock, and so that's how I was able to achieve that. Now, the next thing, and this is, in my opinion, is probably what's leading to a lot of people getting inconsistent vane placement, is that this knock holder is not the greatest, and it's probably because Bohning has had to make a fletching jig that was going to accommodate a variety of arrow manufacturers. So what you need to do when you go to fletch your arrows, you just need to make sure that that knock is properly seated into that knock holder every time you go to put an arrow on. If you are not consistently pushing your arrow back towards that knock holder and holding it in place, I guarantee you that you will get inconsistency with your vane placement. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is when you slide your vane into the clamp, you're going to want to make sure that it's seated all the way back on the clamp, and then you're going to want to hold that in place while you go to pop this on the jig. If you're not doing that, you will also get inconsistency with your vane placement. And like I said, every time you turn this to put a new fletch on, you need to make sure that you're holding that arrow down and holding that vane while you go to place it, and then you guys will be good to go. Now, the next thing that I want to address real quick is just some commonly asked questions that I get, and it's regarding if you can run this in a left or a right, and what type of degree of helical can you put on while using this jig. And this jig is only offered in two different configurations. It's offered in straight, which is basically useless in my opinion, or a right helical with a 3 degree. It is not offered in any other configuration, and you do not get both bases with it. You only get one or the other, so you need to make that determination before you buy it. Now, the first thing that you really should be doing before buying a fletching jig is figure out which way your bow naturally spins the arrow. If it naturally spins it to the right, fletch to the right. If it naturally spins it to the left, fletch it to the left. Now, my Bitzenberger, when I bought this jig, I only bought a left helical clamp due to the fact that this is offered in a right helical clamp. So my bow, my Matthews VXR, shoots arrows naturally to the right. So this is the only jig that I use to fletch arrows. I do not use that Bitzenberger. So I do feel that if you guys follow those tips and tricks, you guys will get consistent vane placement, and it will help you a little later down the road. So the next question that I get asked all the time is, are you able to do a 4 fletch with this jig? And the answer is yes. It does come with 2 different base plates that you can run in a 4 fletch configuration. And it also comes with an instructions and an Allen key for you to swap out those base plates. The one that I have in is obviously for a 3 fletch. I've ran 4 fletch before in the past. I'm not a huge fan of it, so I just stick with the 3 fletch. But yes, you can run this in a 4 fletch configuration. You just got to change out the base when you get it. But in my opinion, overall, at first I was not a big fan of this jig, but once I figured out how to use it properly, I'm a huge fan of it. The simplicity is great. It's fast, it's easy. I can fletch a ton of arrows in a small amount of time. You do have to take some extra steps to just make sure that you have the consistency and the proper vane placement, but overall, once you start doing those, I feel like you'll probably have a better experience than you would with this Bitzenberger. Definitely if you're just getting into fletching, because that's a very complicated jig. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I just wanted to jump on here and address some of the most commonly asked questions, and then give you guys those tips and tricks on when using this jig, on how to get proper and consistent vane placement. But if you guys have any other questions, make sure you leave me a comment below. As always, if you guys have not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. Your support greatly helps us out. And if you have not checked out MichiganAmbushoutdoors.com, go over there, get you guys yourself some merch. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you guys on the next one.